Okay, we're live. Today we have our friend from Europe, Adrian, and he brought a new friend, Ted.
Hi.
Ted, where are you from, by the way?
I'm from the Toronto area in Ontario.
Okay, you're a North American guy, so that's cool.
Yes.
Although one thing that I thought would be interesting today is we started this conversation a little bit a week ago and got a little bit more in depth on Sunday night about sort of the political matrix or matrices that we find ourselves in. But on Sunday, we had all Americans with us, or just myself and a couple other Americans. And then a week ago, we started getting into it, but we didn't get really into the politics yet. We were more on some other subjects. So it'll be interesting to get your guys' take as people not from America. And the reason is because one of the main things that we kind of, harmonized or coalesced on the other night was that one of the main issues, maybe even the main issue, is our two-party system in America. And so
the reds and the blues.
Well, yeah. Well, it's like the red and the blue as far as Democrat, Republican, and then it's sort of like a red pill, blue pill thing, or red pill woke culture. But I imagine it's a little bit different. I know Canada has multiple parties, and then
people tend to say we have a 2.5 party system.
Yeah, that sounds about what I've heard.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in the UK.
Yeah.
I'm in Budapest. I grew up in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
and I also lived in Germany. So I guess there's a few different political systems between us.
And I guess what I'm
in
trying
terms of
to,
numbers of parties.
I guess the perspective I want to get from you guys a little bit more, just in that sort of political landscape thing, is the idea of okay, so in America, I guess sometimes we think, okay, do we need more parties or abolish the parties? And so I guess that's kind of the question. When, like Canada, they say they have like a 2.5 party system, and I think there's a couple other parties, but they just don't really get more than a handful of votes up in Canada. And then I'm not sure about the European system. But basically what I am interested in is the idea of how we might be able to get out of our two-party system in just a practical way. But that's just sort of the practical political side of it. Then the other things that we'll probably get into a little bit in our discussion, and I'll try to hear from you guys a little bit more, is just some of the metaphorical, archetypal ideas, the psychological ideas we got into a little bit on Sunday and last week, as far as people just are in different psychological worlds. So it's like they're fighting each other. Like, I made the point the other night that it's like a big deal of red pill versus woke culture. So it's like, wake up, it's like this. No, wake up, it's like this. And they never agree on anything to wake up that it's like. So it's like they're fighting very different psychological wars and don't know how to get anything done.
Every group thinks that they're the ones who have the red pill, and that people can't agree on what this red pill does and what it means to be woke. And there's diametrically opposing ideas of wokeness out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
And that's one reason I bring it up too, is because I have tried to do a little bit of my own research and just talk to people that I generally meet, people however I meet, and I'm like, hey, what do you think is woke or red pill? And I've gotten a lot of decent answers that seem to make sense, but they're also very different a lot of times, you know, so it's like very all over the place and doesn't make a lot of sense as far as what they actually are.
Have you heard of Mencius Moldbug? Moldbug? I don't know.
No, not really.
He's the guy who's meant to have come up with the red pill thing. And I was listening to him talk to Michael Malice today.
Okay.
Because a Russian friend of mine recommended it, so I thought that would be good. And well, he's Hungarian Russian.
Yeah.
And let me just look him up. But he said he came up with the red pill, and he basically, I think he did. Far right blogger, it says on Wikipedia.
Although
anyway,
that may be true, but I bet it's one of those things. Like, you know, who invented the high five? You know, it's like one of those things where it's going to be debated who really.
I've heard it's a bit of a story trope that goes back a while before the Matrix.
Okay.
That,
really?
Okay. Yeah, that there would be. I've heard before it was pills, it was potions, a red potion and a blue potion. But I only read this in passing, and I never looked into the history of it.
Okay.
No, it doesn't mention it on the Wikipedia page. Anyway, he came up with the cathedral idea, which rings a bell, but I don't know exactly what it is. So anyway, his definition of the right was, or I guess red side or whatever, red pill, was everything that isn't on the left. So.
That's the other thing I hate too about it is that it's like, for the most part, when you get this whole like red team, blue team, Democrat, Republican, or red pill versus woke culture, the only answer that you can like solidly get is the one that doesn't make sense. It's just that, well, we don't want the other people to be there. Which it's like, okay, well, why? Well, I don't know. We just hate those guys because they're horrible. And
okay, well then we've got to get into the extremes of it, which are communism on one side, right?
Yeah, and fascism on the other side.
And fascism, or oligarchy.
That also depends on how you define the political spectrum, because I think a lot of the times if you take conservative, like if you take a conservative politician and you make them more extreme, you'll end up with a libertarian, not a fascist.
That's probably true.
And so, there's the right side of the political spectrum, because it's not really defined as one thing. It's just defined as what's not left. I do think that's a good definition. You know, depending on like which definition you follow to an extreme, you could end up with some very different things.
Although
I would say a libertarian is a rejection of the left, right? Because the left would claim that it's all about equality, right? Equality of outcome, basically. That everyone has the same opportunities, or not even the same opportunities, but everyone has the same outcome. So everyone gets the same pay. Everyone has the right to work,
then you get into communism or socialism.
And then you get into like hardcore socialism, communism.
Although,
and everything that is opposed to that in today's world is like labeled far right or whatever, because that's the attitude of the left, that essentially this is the only way, and the idea is to take things down the slippery slope, right? Which must be resisted. So that's why the red pill is the resistance movement, so to speak, because I think Moldbug said, it's not his real name actually, he's called Curtis Guy Yarvin. He said that what did he say? I lost my train of thought there. Basically, the red pill is the resistance. Everything that believes in some form of hierarchy will always develop, basically, and some kind of differentiation is essential, and that is pretty much obvious if you think about it, because even under communism, you end up with different levels of hierarchy.
If you believe in the nuclear family, then you believe in hierarchy. Like it's that simple.
Well, that's if you, I like to think of,
you can't avoid hierarchies, which is the
yeah.
silly
Well,
thing.
I like to think of the Matrix as the political systems that we live in, or the cultural system, or the morality that we live in, right? Which may be false or correct, right? But the idea of it is to enforce some kind of groupthink or well, groupthink is maybe the wrong word, but some kind of collective idea of the common good, which we talked about last week, is kind of innate in our nature that we want to strive for a better collective good, especially on the feminine side, right?
Yeah, and which it's funny you mentioned that the feminine, because I was gonna say now we're getting into a little bit of we're starting to get into the topic that I said that this would probably be about, which is the archetype of the Great Mother. And I would say with that is the archetype of the Great Father, or similarly the wise old man. And so I would say it can be confusing, but on the side of the left / woke, it is largely the although the archetype goes into a lot of different areas, but that is more the archetype of the Great Mother. And then the conservative / red pill side is more of the Great Father. And it's always important to remember every archetype, especially those which are some of the more main primary archetypes, are always they always have like evil twins. So, and the evil side of it is when it becomes more extreme. So you want to have, in fact, you have to have the Great Mother and the Great Father. And the reason that you see in alchemical images, they're sort of like coming together in a divine marriage, is because it has to do with sort of a thing that we still talk about a lot today, more in practical terms, that you kind of want to be a moderate centrist to some degree, maybe a little to one side or the other, depending on your area or background or whatever. Because you want to, unify the opposites. But on the other hand, where they become sort of their evil twins is on the opposite extremes. So that's the devouring mother and the devouring father.
Tyrannical father, no?
Yes.
Right. You probably say tyrannical father and devouring mother. And it's funny because the devouring mother, and this is the reason I mention it now is because of what you're just saying, is how that she devours not the way you would think of, tyranny, like maybe would be on the side of the father archetype, but on the mother, it's that she's overly protective, overly caring, overly coddling, because then what happens is you have this safety state, this nanny state, this world where nobody can ever die, nobody can ever get hurt, or at least that's the goal. And then nobody ever experiences anything, but eventually they have to. And then when they get out in the real world, they can't handle it, or the next generation kind of devours themselves in a way because they're like children. Because so go ahead.
So that would be, I'm looking at this infographic. That would be like the Aldous Huxley Brave New World kind of utopia, right?
Right. Yeah, because that's basically what happened in a lot of those in that book is in 1984 and a lot of other.
1984 is the tyrannical father, right? Big Brother.
Oh yeah. It's tricky because it's almost like a lot of times I think of it as like a circle. Ideally, you want to. Here, I have a cookie. Ideally, here's my cookie symbol. You want them to be like harmonized and coming together, union of opposites, everybody kind of in the moderate in the middle, give or take. But then what often happens is you get to most people being on one side or the other, but the bad extreme, it's kind of like if it's linear, then there would be a bad extreme on either side. But it's good to represent it as a circle because they come back together where the extreme versions of both are very close to the same thing.
Yeah.
So
but that would be fascism, right? Hitler would be the tyrannical father,
right?
And Stalin would be the tyrannical mother.
Yeah, essentially tyrannical or devouring. And
Oh,
devouring mother. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I also noticed when the Nazis tend to refer to Germany as the fatherland, and when I read the Gulag Archipelago, they sometimes use the term fatherland, but more often than not, they're using the term motherland.
Yeah, Mother Russia.
Yeah,
which goes along
not
with
Father Russia.
Yeah, I've never heard Father Russia. They might say father sometimes, but that's interesting that it comes out that way. And when you get to the extremes, they kind of unite again, and you see that like it's weird because the protests here, at least in America, they started roughly a month before the whole George Floyd situation, but they were more on the right, and they were actually pretty moderate protests. I mean, sometimes they would have guns, but they probably weren't even loaded. Basically saying like release the nannies to end the house arrest kind of thing. And then of course the media was like, oh, these horrible people, they're spreading more viruses. And then the George Floyd thing happened, and then they're like, everybody get out and protest, because it's their side.
Even the Canadian Prime Minister went to a protest in a huge crowd.
Yeah.
And there is no comment from him about the repercussions on social distancing and disease spread and all that.
Yeah, and I think if there's any good to come out of that, it's that now it just seems like it's all coming to a conclusion, because there's no way that it was hard before that, before the protests got really bad, to be like, okay, here's how we got to go out and like end the social distancing. Now it's like, okay, well, people got tired of it, and it's already been over for a while, and there might be some spreading of the virus, but the deaths are going down. So some people might be getting a cold-like symptoms. But anyway, go ahead.
Would you agree that the virus situation was a kind of devouring mother situation?
Yeah, definitely.
And then the Black Lives Matter is problem. Well, the Black Lives Matter became also a devouring mother thing.
Well,
like
it's like
all the population.
Symptom. It's like a symptom of that disease.
And then it became an anger directed at the tyrannical father of the police.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's definitely based off of an impression, however correct or not, that the police are being tyrannical fathers. And then to some extent, I think that to whatever extent the police are being tyrannical, or their system needs to be fixed so that cops that get a ton of complaints against them are properly disciplined. To whatever extent that's true, then it's true that there needs to be protests, but you obviously see a lot of people going overboard with, calls to defund the police and whatnot, which from what I heard, only something like 70% of Black people actually oppose that. And yet you get all of these allies who are jumping on board with it and saying you're terrible if you don't agree with it. And that part of the movement is being very devouring mother, right?
Another aspect of the US is that it's quite clearly run by corporations and white male politicians, whatever. But there's a lot of kind of corporate corruption. If you drive around, you see the same franchises everywhere, strip malls, everything's zoned and controlled. That's the weirdest thing in America, is that the cities, towns even didn't seem to grow up organically. It's all pre-planned, everything, and then you get franchises and obviously franchise holders, but so everything's been kind of structured out to serve business, let's say, and then And then that would be the idea for me of like the captain of industry or the expert or the scientist or whatever, or the technocrat is the kind of, well, let's say the scientist would be, if he's doing his job properly, he would be the great father, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Would you say? And you know, the technocrat, the captain of industry, you know, who builds up a big business and employs a lot of people and all that. That would be the great father, right? And then on the flip side of that, I guess you'd have the kind of law and order idea, right? I don't know. Right. It would be like the enforcement of the law. Would you say like the tyrannical father is the enforcement of the law, but the drawing up of the law, which would be the idea of protecting people's rights, right, and stopping crime and keeping people safe.
Right.
That would be that would be the great mother, and they should work together. So
right.
You know,
maybe, they have to. They always
maybe
will.
I mean, in a family, even you get the idea of, you know, the mothers with the kids, or the traditional way that it was, and she would say, "Wait till your father gets home," and then he would get the belt out, right?
Yeah.
And that would be how they would work together, right? One would be lawmaking, or, you know, keeping things in check on a daily basis, and then you'd get the strong arm.
Right.
Of the
like one is the nurturer that just kind of like provides this environment for flourishing, and then the other is to try to bring order to chaos and some structure to all of what is flourishing, and both will always be there. And even if you have a single parent home, then it's basically like you either have to have whichever single parent fulfill both of those roles, or you sometimes, you know, you'll have like an uncle or a grandma, grandpa, whatever, that'll have to step in. So those roles are always going to be there on the family level, on the local community level, and then just whatever level of culture that there is.
Well, it's a kind of leadership versus consensus, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, nurturing and nurturing the chaos and then bringing order out of that. On the other hand, it's just that's the dual role that always is going on some level, and you want it to be harmonized together, but then but it doesn't always work that way. But what you just really want to avoid is the extremes on either side, because the extremes bring about symptoms like what we're seeing now, which is violence, and I don't know if
we haven't mentioned the media, right? Which has a big role in the whole political spectrum. And the media would naturally tend to be, because it's based on emotion and outrage, or you know, clickbait, or attracting people's attention. That would also be a function of the devouring mother, right? Trying to guide people in the right direction, protect people's rights, shape the consensus, right?
Yeah, they kind of have to go that way, because if they come across as a father archetype, then people generally avoid that type of media. Not always, but they avoid that kind of media because it's almost, you know, like strong arm media, like, come here, buy this, look at this. And at least by this point in history, you know, sometimes it goes up and down as far as, you know, people's media appetite or whatever. But, you know, if somebody's like, look over here,
it's easy to get outraged about that kind of
So it's like
alt-right media, and let's say, I don't know why it became alt-right and not just right, but I guess the alt-right would be the other thing that was in the title would be the kind of hero archetype who's like on his own in the alternative media landscape, the kind of Jordan Peterson type, father of the internet, hero,
and that's
telling it like it is.
That's sort of the other thing is within all of this, there's always going to be those kind of like things going up and down on both ends of the spectrum. And then sometimes there'll have to be another element. That's kind of like the Neo or the hero, or, you know, we were talking a little bit about some roles in the Matrix universe. Yeah, that's like a Gandhi, a Martin Luther King Jr., to some degree, Jordan Peterson, you know, these who just come out and speak the truth to bring order out of the chaos that was coming from both sides. But it's pretty chaotic. But
what do you think? What do you think, Ted, from a symbolic perspective? We covered it, most of it.
You know, I find it really difficult to switch between thinking like Jordan Peterson and thinking like Pageau in terms of, you know, going from archetypes to symbolism. Mm-hmm. Well, in part because there's such a blurry line between them. Is like, it's like trying to cross from one trench to another through no man's land when it's really foggy, and you keep on getting turned around and end up back in your own trench or something like that.
Yeah, Jonathan Pageau would talk about maybe, you know, some biblical figures.
Right.
In the political, like a political equivalent of, I don't know, Donald Trump or someone.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't think we mentioned during the recording where you guys came from or where Ted came from. You guys met in that symbolism Facebook group.
The symbolic world within the zombie invasion.
Okay.
Yes. It is the Facebook group for Jonathan Pageau.
Okay, which is it's good because that's sort of along the lines of what we're getting at. But maybe you can tell us, Ted, a little bit about those distinctions, because I think, like in my group and what we used to talk about, it's along the lines of Jordan Peterson and Carl Jung, who can, you know, keep up with that. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the Jonathan Pageau perspective will differ a little bit.
So he would focus on recurring patterns and the way that that multiple patterns can be brought together in a single representation. You know, multiple overlapping patterns of reality can be brought together in a single representation, which is what he calls a symbol. And that's going from the sort of the ancient meaning of the word symbol, which comes from the Greek words sim, meaning roughly together, to bring, and then bol, which is throw. So it means to throw together. So a symbol is something that brings together multiple meanings, multiple patterns of reality. You know, you can talk about something
on many
like,
levels.
Yeah, on many levels, right? And so, you know, you look at an image of, say, the baby Jesus being held by the Virgin Mary, and, you know, keeping with Peterson's types of archetypes, that is an image of the Good Mother,
right?
But it's also an image of Mary acting as a frame for Jesus. And so symbolically, women tend to sort of be the frame and men tend to be the pictures themselves, in a sense, or women create the space for men to do the action, right? Women are the soil and men are the seed that gets planted in the soil. And
would you say women specifically, or women, men specifically, or masculine, feminine?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. It's a bit more accurate to say that femininity and feminine ideas tend to be associated with the frame or the soil that the plant grows out of. There's some very some very straightforward sexual imagery that you can think of when you're talking about like femininity being associated with soil and masculinity being associated with the seed that implants in soil to create the new plant.
Yeah. But not anything, but many things can be symbols. So let's say the cross is made out of wood, so it's made out of a tree, tree of life. And then what I like,
and there's two pieces of wood in the cross, just like there's the two trees mentioned in the Garden of Eden. Right. And it is often said that one of the pieces of wood was taken from the tree of life and the other from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
So the way I look at it, but I have my own kind of symbolic world, I guess, would be the vertical would be the hierarchy.
Yeah.
So Christ and God, and then you'd have the feminine axis of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Of
it sort of brings
equality and goodness, right? So
right.
Or even like left and right or whatever.
Yeah. And it's
where the left hand would be. Sorry, what would the left hand be? What would they say?
There's a lot of things I can say about the left hand. The left is what pushes away. It's what condemns. It's also what tends to hold the law. If you look at typical Roman statues.
Oh yeah.
And even in the story of the crucifixion, there's two thieves crucified on either side of Christ. And it was the thief on the left who was unrepentant, and the thief on the right who asked Jesus to remember him in heaven. And Jesus said, "Today you'll be with me in heaven." And this is the part why oftentimes images of the crucifixion are drawn with Jesus's feet sort of slanted a bit, so the right one's further up than the left, representing the way that Christ uses his left foot to hold down those who are against the Logos, and he lifts up his right foot to ease the burden of those who are repentant.
I never heard that one before.
Yeah.
So there's like many levels of symbolism, and there's always a bit of argument about in the group, what is symbolism?
Yeah.
What does it mean? Is this a symbol? It rained today.
A lot of the time in our Facebook group, it's not so much that there's argument. There's just
It's not
people struggling to find good ways of phrasing things, because a lot of it's just so abstract that everyone has a bit of a different way of phrasing it, and no one's really sure, what's the best way to phrase these ideas to somebody who's uninitiated.
And as soon as you try and describe it or try and put your finger on it, it kind of shifts meaning a little bit, or someone will say, but that's not what it means to me, and then you get a kind of alternate reality develops, and you get a sense of people having a different.
Because we're on this subject, which is a little more in the religious sphere, which was more like what we were on a couple weeks ago, but that's fine.
We can bring it back to politics, no problem.
Well, no, but I'm curious on a couple things on that, and then we can go back to the political thing in a few minutes or whatever. But there's been some ideas that I've been trying to figure out how to, I guess, phrase myself. And so it'd be interesting to hear your perspective. But okay, so one is, there's this idea that the more people have studied, especially in the past 100 years or so, the history of the figure of Jesus, and a lot of people are saying, no, he wasn't exactly that person. He was just a rebel, if anything. We can't prove he was a lot of we can't prove a lot of the biblical stories of even the New Testament and everything else. And I guess with that. So, and sometimes I have to say, sure, okay, no problem. But and the reason that's an issue is because I feel like a lot of times people get so hung up on the literalism of like, and that's where people get hung up with Jordan Peterson. It's like, oh, he doesn't want to answer if he believes in God because he's afraid he's going to offend his base of some Christians that are taking along, which I think is stupid. And if anything, it's the opposite. That if he was being that way, it would be more like he doesn't want to lose the these new like atheist Christians that are kind of coming to his side. But I don't think it's that at all. He's been that way, at least since the 80s, where he's not taking a position on belief in God.
Yeah, but it's very important for him to take that position because it allows him to be the bridge.
Right, exactly.
He's like the doorman at the church, calling people and saying, "Hey, I think this is something interesting."
Right.
But
yeah, he's the union of opposites right now, at least in that camp.
Plus there are so many denominations of Christianity. They can't even agree on whether on God. We had in the Orthodox. There's a lot of Orthodox people. Jonathan Pageau's Orthodox. So there's a bit of an Orthodox community in the Symbolic World group, and I mean one of the issues we get into is that if I talk about Jung and the shadow, then they say that that's not really something they talk about, and that's a kind of whereas let's say the Catholicism that has it very quite strongly represented through the idea of confession,
Yeah, I don't know,
confessing your sin. So there's a whole load of murky stuff about which interpretation is correct. I mean, the idea that St. Augustine said, evil is the absence of good. Right. So that's that would jar with Jung and Nietzsche and most philosophy, I would say.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's an aside. Yeah.
Well, the thing is too, it's that if you avoid the shadow and you just want to say, oh no, it's just the devil, or simplify it like that, or it's just evil stuff like the devil and demons, or our carnal nature, whatever you might want to call it, that's what strengthens the shadow, or strengthens.
Well, it's well represented in the scripture. The shadow is extremely well represented.
Right.
Read the scriptures, you see they're talking about the shadow all the time.
Right, but the thing is if you avoid it like that, then that causes the repression that strengthens the shadow. And so on the other hand, if you discuss the shadow and or even the devil and discuss things along those lines, you don't strengthen the devil or the shadow. You integrate it, and not you integrate it.
Yeah, I mean that's we're back to them. You can bring that back to politics.
Yeah,
because the left doesn't claim to have a shadow.
Yeah, which is exactly their issue.
Their idea is that they take offense at everything,
right?
Because they don't have a shadow.
Right. I had a friend at university who was very staunchly right wing. He created a club called the Trent Republicans, and it was basically, he admitted to the whole point of it was to troll leftists. And I remember him, I think he had outright admitted that he's kind of racist. And he said, well, if the left really believed that everyone's subconsciously racist, then why should they be so shocked when I actually consciously admit it? Shouldn't they be applauding the fact that I'm conscious of it? At least I'm admitting it.
Right.
It's just a complete embracing of his shadow in that kind of sense.
Well, okay. That's true. Well, okay. Although I feel like the big issue is on that too, and it's something that I talk a bit about in the group and everything, is getting the terminology right, because technically racism is believing a race is superior or inferior purely based on what comes through biology or perhaps through evolution.
Or appearance, I would say. I'd add appearance.
Yeah, well, and that gets into, that starts getting into what's the real issue now, which is more of culturalism or psychological issues, whether they're conscious or unconscious. But then that doesn't have anything to do with the biological aspect.
Well, I would say if you have two, naked people, but you have no clothing or culture, you don't hear the way they speak or anything else, and you automatically judge on the basis of that. I would say that would.
Well, see, and that's where I say that it's it becomes less of an issue of racism, and then it's going to be just either an issue of what you either call prejudice or culturalism, but not technically racism, because it was a big deal.
I get where it's a fine line between that.
Well, no, just because in racism, technically, when you make that prejudice or you make that judgment, whatever the case, it's specifically because you believe that biologically, not just that one appears different, but and there's still some who believe this way. It's there's not zero, but I don't know if there's hundreds or thousands or whatever. It's not a big number, but they believe that people of a darker tone have lower IQs and they're more prone to violence and retardation, all these different, and crime, all these different things. And then people of a lighter skin tone, on the other hand, the Aryan race, they might call it sometimes, they are kind of like the higher, more highly evolved, less animal, more divine. They kind of they commandeered the Ubermensch kind of thing, and so they put a biological. They take it from biology, and that's where a lot of times you'll see that they'll try to
but let's
measure the skulls of black people versus the skulls of white people and certain indentations of the skull.
Well, but look at the reason that the West became what it did is because of the society, the culture, the patriarchal, let's say, entrepreneurial striving of it, which was which was always geared to creating larger and larger societies until you end up, empires, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas, let's say, I don't know, the tribal cultures of Africa, or I don't know so much about India or whatever, but let's say Africa, because it's the most, I don't know, I can say primitive, right? If they're living in wooden huts, I can say the culture is primitive.
I think archaic is the technical and PC.
Archaic, sorry. I had a feeling I was using inappropriate.
I'm just trying to help.
Thank you. So there's and maybe the climate, I don't know, but there's the drive towards collectivism in the West, fomented by a religion that is
patriarchal.
Well, I guess patriarchal, but also but patriarchal and matriarchal.
Yeah.
So the larger family structure, or larger.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at how countries developed in Europe,
right,
it would be a marriage between, this king and this prince and this princess, and then you'd get the Bohemian or whatever, and you'd match to the king of Luxembourg came to Hungary and married, and then he became the king, and you had these kind of Game of Thrones, whatever, I don't know, Game of Thrones, but you had all these alliances across Europe.
Right.
So it became like they weren't states at that time, but they would all collect tax and have conflicts and alliances and different stuff going on, and they'd end up forming larger and larger groups, and they'd have to form armies,
Right.
and so more and more people came under the
monarchy.
Different various monarchies and various
type of
states.
tribe rather than a tribal tribe or a village type of tribe.
Well, yeah, and from that developed a form of government, right? A form of policing, and then I'm not too good on history, but there's a point where France became very, very large and powerful, the French, and Napoleon was rampaging throughout Europe, and he said he could burn through. He had the weaponry, the muskets or whatever, and they had the weaponry, and thousands and thousands of men could be lined up and up against each other. And along with that, you had what I always find interesting is these big churches were built. Like the Notre Dame church took like 400 years to build, right? And that's a kind of symbolic kind of striving for some kind of collective meaning, and also the church is full of symbolism, right, of how to break out from the matrix, I guess.
I think we should specify, you say, it's a collective striving for meaning, but it's a non-tyrannical collective striving for meaning. It's not a power source that's trying to impose the meaning. It is,
or it shouldn't be. Sometimes that's commandeered by, it becomes tyrannical, and that was kind of like the issue of the Middle Ages, or the Dark Ages, you might say, where the church was supposed to be that people striving to find enlightenment, so to speak, or maturity, and then that got taken over by.
But imagine living in a town where you're living in a small modest house or whatever, and they're building this church which is never going to be finished in your lifetime. And it's costing your taxpayers. You have to give up your crops or energy, or people had to work on these buildings, right? And how they did that, I'm amazed that these things got pulled off.
Well, I think maybe part of the reason it was
Parliament in Hungary.
It was difficult to levy extremely high taxes in those days.
Well, then they didn't have cranes and concrete and whatever.
That too, and then
they had to ship the marble from Italy.
It's a bit of a problem.
So these huge operations, like the whole culture was mobilized into armies and also church. So you had the church and the army were the two like really dominant things. And I guess Jonathan Pageau would say the church is the matriarch or the mother aspect. Would you say that?
Probably if it's behaving properly.
Well, it's definitely the caring and nurturing
as long as
tabernacle.
it doesn't become tyrannical.
Yeah, but then the belief system it embodies is more of the masculine thing, and so you can have a wise religion, but if it's sort of being embodied or carried out by a church or an institution of some sort, that becomes tyrannical. You can have a devouring mother of a church that's manifesting what is otherwise a wise father of a religion, in manner of speaking, vice versa, and that sort of thing, which is one of the reasons why it can be such a thorny conversation to try discussing like the violence of religion and how much religious violence there's actually been in the world, and how much of the world's violence has been because of religion.
This would be the issue that there's a religion and there's boundaries to the religion, of the people. You have to create. There's a point where you have to create a boundary, and the wealth of the wealth that the culture builds up through its strength of uniting the heavenly, what is it, the tyrannical father and the great mother, if they're united, then that creates a very strong and wealthy culture, right? And we've seen that in Europe. Whereas, I mean, you can compare other cultures, right? But this is where
one thing that England did very well was in the aftermath of the Glorious Revolution, they already had the idea of the separation of church and state, but it was in the Glorious Revolution when they really figured out how to take the separation of church and state and actually make it happen. Figure out a system of rules that could really prevent the state from favoring one church over another, and that made it very difficult for a religion to be tyrannical. And it certainly was a big part of laying the foundation for the individualism and the innovation that we saw during the 1700s Industrial Revolution.
But the Catholic Church in particular is based a lot on guilt. So the idea of the fear of God and you better behave or you'll go to hell, right? The conscience idea. Whereas the state is tyrannical in the sense that there's a police force, taxation, rules that are actually enforced. So are we getting somewhere, Isaac?
So the state is tyrannical by having a heavy hand. Right. The church is tyrannical by making you have a heavy heart.
Yeah, it should be that way. And so let me wrap up that to some degree to the question I was getting at, but kind of before we went down that rabbit hole, which was, okay, we've got these stories from thousands of years going back to the day of Jesus, roughly. And so I guess the thing that I'm trying to get at, and it's hard to phrase, is
one other thing about Jesus is that he said there's the law of God and the law of Caesar, and you have to obey both of them. The law of God is more important if it comes to the crunch.
Right.
But the law of Caesar generally respect the culture that you're in. Which I think Jonathan Pajot did a discussion, did a talk about this, about how Christianity is a cuckold religion. It was able to, right? Did you see that one?
It's a YouTube video on Jonathan Pajot's channel called "Is Christianity a Cuckold Religion?" And that was an interesting one. It was made for an interesting Facebook discussion.
Right.
Does he actually interact with that group, by the way, on Facebook?
Sometimes
a tiny bit.
Yeah.
He says he reads way more than he actually comments.
Yeah. So okay, the question I'm trying to get at, but a little bit more on the religious aspect, is sometimes the atheist type will act like it's super important if you say what your exact beliefs are in God, and specifically of the resurrection and heaven. But sometimes I make the point that it's better that we don't have that as historical fact. And it's better, whatever you want to call it, for our psychology, our society, or whatever, if that story is a
not a literal story.
Well, you might call it a symbol or a meta story, or the ultimate hero story type of thing, and that you have
it's certainly important that has meaning other than just the literal meaning.
Right. and I feel like, okay, I was trying to find a quote last week when we were getting into this, but there's a quote, I think it's from Carl Jung's chapter in Man and His Symbols, when he says something like, once you name and define a symbol, it loses its life or it loses its meaning. Or once you make it literal, sort of. And so I feel like let's say we could do either one. We could say there was literally no resurrection, or there literally was a resurrection, on whatever level that you could literally say that happened or didn't happen. Either way, it just loses its meaning, because whatever position you're going to take on it, whether you say I absolutely believe there was no resurrection or I absolutely believe that there was, it helps in your psychological development that's a leap of faith rather than just like finding a historical fact. There's other historical facts where we can, point at people in history. Sometimes I mention people who lived a sort of sacrificial life, or, gave up their lives, like Socrates. Abraham Lincoln knew he was probably going to get assassinated. So did Martin Luther King Jr. So did Gandhi. And you can think of some others, that they weren't exactly martyrs, but they really laid down their lives. And you can point at that, and you can get a lot from the story. But I guess this is kind of like where I'm trying to get this perspective from you guys, as far as more of that symbolic perspective. And this is okay, because sometimes I talk to Jonathan and Jesse, who are interested in this kind of stuff, but they're more on that sort of Sam Harris, atheist side, although they see the value in, Jordan Peterson and all that. And that sometimes they'll like really want to get into like the literal, what the deal is with God and what people believe in God, and they want to get into these like theological debates. Not so much them. I got more of that issue when I had Jordan Myers on 2 or 3 weeks ago. But so I guess what I'm getting at is that, like, I believe there's value, and that's where I sort of see the value in like Jordan Peterson not taking a firm stance on God, not just to be the bridge, but there is value in whatever position that you take, that it's a leap of faith. So I don't know, I kind of want to get your guys' perspective on that, and then we can diverge back into the political matrix.
Well, I would say that in politics, there are various levels of reality, right?
Reality and leaps of faith, yeah.
Because you have to think about how often you actually have interactions with the government. You vote once every 4 years. You pay your taxes, right? You have
sometimes you walk into a government office.
Sometimes, sometimes you have to, buy a car or whatever, or buy a house, or apply for a grant or whatever else, or some kind of building permit, right? Or sometimes you get pulled over by the police and whatever, and sometimes you're pissed off. They gave you a ticket, they give you a warning or whatever. But these are like happen quite rarely. You know the rules. And that's it, basically. That's the rules are the rules, and you live by the rules. So
you
don't,
right? and do all of those things almost zero. You could get through your life and never vote, pay little or no taxes, or at least not really feel it. And you could get through your life, maybe get pulled over once in a while, but not in a very damaging way. And
now, and now we've had this situation where the governments have decided, okay, everyone stays at home.
Yeah,
this is like an extreme situation. This is not like this is not normal in our normal lives.
It's like every day you're having this sort of indirect interaction with the government, in that, you on most of your days you probably want to leave the house, but there's that government standing outside your door telling you can't.
has absolutely nothing to do with the way you voted 3 years ago, right?
Uh-huh.
If you live in the States.
It's biological.
It has nothing to do because, okay, you might say Clinton would have handled it differently, but
Or Obama.
you didn't vote on the basis of how is Clinton going to handle the coronavirus pandemic, right?
Or any pandemic, yeah.
Or any situation in the future, you can anticipate that there might be a war situation, or
Pandemic platform.
it's important that they whatever, Korea or China or whatever, some kind of thing that you. But even then, you have, when you do vote once every 4 years, and speaker's a bit of an anarchist here, but whatever. Then you basically cast your vote for one of two things, and what impact does it have? So there's this illusion of participation, right? In politics.
I mean, it is just your vote is diluted with millions and millions of people, and so it's.
So that's a fairly logical conclusion to draw, right? The reality is, within this democratic system, you have very little interaction with the government unless there's a pandemic or rioting on the streets, or you're black and you have to deal with the police every other day. That's another question. But apart from that, everyone else is living a reality that doesn't exist. They live through the news, and they live through their empathetic responses to whatever they see. So if something happens, and the closer it happens, if it happens in their neighborhood, then they're like, "Oh, did you hear?" Whatever.
Yeah. And I really appreciate what you're saying here, because I used to follow all sorts of news, both Canadian news and American news, because here in Canada we get a lot of stuff coming across the border, and I got to a point when, well, it's abundantly obvious that so many of the stories I was following just don't affect me on a daily life, and bit by bit I started focusing more and more on just the things that affect me. And so when people around me are say talking about U.S. politics, a lot of the time it involves complaining about Trump.
Yeah.
And
right.
As a Canadian talking to Canadians, my response is like, what does it matter? How does it actually affect you? And I had this conversation with my mom.
How does it affect you, and what can you change?
Yeah, my mom brought up something about how, well, what about if he's threatening to change the North American Free Trade Agreement or something like that? And it's like, well, if that's really the case, if Trump's doing something that's actually relevant to Canada, you'll hear it on Canadian news. And so just follow Canadian news. But even at that, when you're following Canadian news, it's a lot of times some federal issues that's not connected to you whatsoever. And so again, it's like.
But I forgot something really very.
How much is your life going to be affected if we repealed NAFTA? Maybe a little bit, maybe not.
Well, I would say it actually would be affected fairly significantly, because Canada does a ton of trade with the U.S. I'm pretty sure we're your number one trading partner, like more than China. And if it's not more than China, it's extremely close.
Yeah.
So the other thing,
NAFTA, it's just
And not only that, most provinces do more trade with the U.S. than they do with other provinces.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So
the thing I forgot to mention was that in most countries, a large proportion of the workforce will be employed by the government. So you're like 30 or 40% of people are working for the government in something like that. Doctors, nurses,
right,
bus drivers, or whatever else, and or politicians even, and that creates a big tendency towards bureaucracy and the kind of devouring mother thing where things get outsourced to more and more people involved in making sure the society is safe, and you get this kind of epidemics of, which we have in the UK quite seriously, like epidemics of health and safety, and regulation, like over regulation, because you have so many people employed in the regulation business, let's say, or issuing grants to people, that you get that the state becomes a kind of devouring mother, where it regulates all business and controls everything, and everything is zoned off and everything is micromanaged. But
as it starts employing more and more people, it's much more, the idea that it's a devouring mother becomes much more literal as it employs more and more people and sort of sucks up the economy into itself.
Right.
Yeah, and it just recycles itself and becomes more and more self-serving.
Mm-hmm.
And also, those kind of institutions or whatever have their own like PR people pushing more and more, self-congratulatory, propaganda out.
All the different departments of the government. And
what should almost be okay if the government was run really well, but by nature it becomes horribly run.
By consensus, by some kind of
Well, it's just because in the typical free markets, capitalist markets, you might say, the incentive is to do well, and if you do well, you go away. You're out of business at some point, sooner or later, on some level, But on the government side, you don't have that, because you're never going away ever. So you can be horrible, and you can be horrible at your thing, but there's just not the incentive. That's like here. I don't know how it is in your countries, but here although it's come a long way the last couple of years, we'll complain about how like the DMV is really slow. And the reason that it is really slow, and although it's gotten a lot faster up until the pandemic, was, but it's because they have no incentive. If there were a business of the DMV, if it were more like a capitalist type business, then it'd be like where they have competition, especially. Then it'd be like, oh, this DMV sucks because it takes 2 hours.
Wait, what's the DMV?
Oh, Department of Motor Vehicles, like where you get your driver's license and license plates and everything. So, if that were privatized, I'm not necessarily saying that it should be, but if it were privatized, for example, then it'd be like, okay, this DMV sucks and it goes out of business. But since that can't happen with the DMV because it's a government-run organization, and then the same thing happens with public schools and state schools.
But it goes to the extreme when the banks are too big to fail.
Right.
That's the biggest devouring mother, right? When the economy can't fail, no one can fail.
And there's certain legal constructs that make that so, or regulations related to reserve banking and ensuring government-backed loans and these sorts of things that create the situation of a bank that's too big to fail in the first place.
Yeah, and it would be okay, but every of the major banks, like sometimes the smaller banks will screw things up, and then they basically just get devoured by one of the bigger banks, one of the top 5 to 10 banks. But the top 5 or 10 banks, they do major screw ups on like a regular basis, where they're like opening accounts for dead people or opening accounts for living people that are.
Or even the crash was just lending wildly because they knew that they would be bailed out.
And then it's not like, okay, slap on the wrist or anything. It's just like, okay, maybe give somebody $1 million bonus and have them go into a different bank or something.
Yeah, I think you're making a lot of good points here, but in terms of what causes the devouring mother phenomenon, it's a bit more relevant to talk about the way that each section or department of the government, they become very aware of their purpose and the value of having their department in society, but because their funding comes from the government, and they're not aware of the drain that they are creating when they get their funding. And so an example I've used is actually an example about public health that I've been using since before the pandemic, simply because I have a close friend who works for public health. And we've sort of been in this. She's a bit more pro-bureaucracy than I am.
Yeah.
And so before the pandemic, her day job was a lot to do with food security and reviewing studies on how to better provide food security and the condition of food security. So food security meaning the ability to have stable, reliable access to quality food, in particular among the low income population, etc. And so
this is a friend of yours who has a government job to that end.
Yeah. So working in public health, right? And so when we had an election a year and a half ago, it's 2 years. Actually, no, it's 2 years ago. Man, it's been a while. And the new government was cutting funding for public health and doing a bunch of restructuring. So we have 19 regional units that cover the public health needs of the whole province, and they're going to trim that down to 7 by amalgamating a bunch of them and cutting funding and all this stuff. And she was complaining about it all, and it got me thinking about how she has a very good understanding of what benefit the public health unit can be to our society, and how increasing or decreasing her particular funding can affect the food security needs of the people on the street just outside my house and this type of thing. But she's not aware of how much other good the government can do when it cuts her funding and moves that funding to somewhere else in society, or when it cuts that funding and just doesn't, uses this as a reason to not tax people in the first place, and that sort of thing. All right. And so she, as well as many other people in the bureaucracy, tend to advocate for more funding. And you say, you need to fund us more, and it's shameful that you're not funding us more. And in part that's because, but they don't. And there's a lot of truth typically when they're saying, if you give our public health unit more money, we can improve food security among the homeless by this amount. I'm not trying to say they're necessarily lying when they make those claims. It's just they don't realize every bit of money the government gives them, it needs to devour another part of society to do that. Right.
Well, and I hate it that so many people of this, bureaucracy side of things, leftist side, you might call it, they act like the answer to everything is money. It's like, if we just pour money on the poor, then they're going to turn into, upstanding, wonderful citizens, which might have some truth and value to it, but there's more to it than that. It's just like, like a lot of this Black Lives Matter movement right now, I think they would do a lot better. And I mentioned this, I don't know if it was Sunday or a week ago, that, if rather than saying nobody's going to argue that Black Lives Matter or any race, they would focus on the justice side of it, Black Justice Matters or something along those lines, because they could actually, instead of just being like, okay, we're going to disband the police and we're going to, destroy the police departments and make them vacate, they could actually get things done, the prison populations are just disproportionately minorities and probably more Black in America. And they could probably get a lot of Black people released from prison that are victimless crimes, especially right now in the pandemic. But it's like this whole mob mentality of, no, we just need to, they don't even know. It's just this herd of the devouring mother churned these, I don't know what you call this movement, into a destructive mob. And they often act like the answer is to just pour money here and there that's going to solve everything.
Well,
I meant
it's an anti-authoritarian movement. it's an anti-authoritarian movement. That's the thing. They're against the police. The police are the scapegoat in this story. And then you have the situation in Seattle where they've created
a new country.
Created like a new country on the basis of opposition to the police, because there's no, like, if you want to create a new country, go to the countryside and do it there, right? Buy a village or whatever.
That's the thing about all of these extreme movements. They say that they're anti-authoritarian and anti-evil or whatever, or anti-fascism or whatever. But then when you actually let them run amok like this, like whether it was Stalin or the Chaz or these extreme movements,
they end up being just as totalitarian as the people who they are opposing. And this is something that the Gulag Archipelago makes very clear. Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago.
Totalitarianism, not your totalitarianism.
Yeah. Solzhenitsyn makes a lot of comparisons between the old Tsarist empire and the new Bolsheviks, and he lists off these are all the different complaints that the Bolsheviks had against the Tsars, and for every single one of them he shows how the Bolsheviks ended up being worse.
Yeah.
And so part of the issue is that they're spending most of their time being anti this and anti that and opposing, defunding the police, and they're not doing a lot of discourse about what they're going to replace it at. What are they pro? We know that they're anti, but what are they pro? So,
right.
It's not a good sign.
Just to check. So I was talking to my mother, who grew up in Hungary, and left for the UK in '71.
Okay.
She met my dad, who was over in Hungary, and I'm in Budapest now. And it was so I asked her, so what did you experience in your, so she was born in 48, so she was in her early 20s, basically, when she was already working, and she said her friends, she had a situation. Was her father, first of all, in 56, where there was the secret police, and he was working, he was on a nature reserve or game reserve, and he had a guest who was a member of the secret police, and the revolution started in 56, and he buried the guy's party book in the garden or in the field, right?
Okay.
Because when the revolution started, he would have, for being in the party, you would be in, like, if communism was ousted, right? All the people who were in the party were like persona non grata. They would basically be.
What year was
killed? Maybe killed, but imprisoned or whatever. But my grandfather wasn't in the party, but he was working with this guy, and to save his skin, he hid his party booklet, because if you're in the party, you could be in trouble. And I don't know why the guy, I didn't get into the details of the story, I don't know why the guy didn't get rid of it himself or denounce his party status or whatever, but maybe he didn't want to, because he thought it would go the other way and the party would remain in power. So basically you had a bunch of people, or everyone had to make like a moral decision. Am I going to go into the party, which meant you could have a good career, rise up through the bureaucracy, basically, or am I going to be outside the system? So my mother, in one of her jobs, she was working, and there was a trade union, and they refused to enter into the trade union. So her colleagues formed a group who en masse refused to enter the trade union, because they thought, in this like workers' paradise, why do you need a trade union? And why are they coercing people to join the trade union, right? So the point of the trade union would be to represent the workers, right? So if they're coercing people to enter the trade union, then that's not a real trade union, and they refused to enter it. So she got she had to leave that job in the end. She left, but it was a big deal. And one of her friends, so it was like a big scandal or a big, like, you know, you had to make a moral decision: am I going to be in the trade union or not? And I don't know what the terms of being in the trade union were, but then you would be trapped in that job, I guess, or whatever. And on principle, she and her friends or colleagues said they're not going to enter. Yeah. One of her friends was a political scientist or political student, and she refused to enter the party, which was obviously a big scandal, because if you study in a communist country, if you study political science, then basically the whole idea is to indoctrinate you to be in the Communist Party.
Right.
So these are kind of everyday dilemmas, and these are women, you know, in their 20s. Like the higher up you go, the bigger kind of absurdities you'd have to come up against. So that would, that would be an example of the real hardcore situation of living under communism. And then you could say, yeah, how far away is that in, like, some of the stuff you hear in the US now about, you know, you can't say this, you can't do that, you have to, you know, you lose your job if you speak up on this or that issue.
Right. Or you platformed, or there's a lot of people now, just for being Trump supporters, they get their Facebook account shut down, or they get their YouTube account shut down.
Yeah, and it's a million miles away from. So your interaction with the government or with the matrix, is about what you're saying and what you think and what you believe, and whether that fits in with the official narrative or the government's what the government's putting forward.
Right.
Or like what the media is saying. Because if you're reasonably high profile, you know, the CEO of such and such said this, then, you know, you come under pressure.
Yeah.
But
so it's not, you know, it's not that far removed, you know.
Yeah.
And what also is concerning is that the amount of pressure you come under seems to change depending on what your political affiliation is. And so there's a Canadian example and an American example that I can bring up for this. And the Canadian example is the sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden, which are roughly equivalent insofar as two assault allegations can be equivalent. They're roughly equivalent to the allegations brought up against Brett Kavanaugh, who was the nominee for the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was just this massive scandal in the news when Brett Kavanaugh was being brought through the ringer, and, you know, all the news organizations seemed to be out to get him or something like that, justly or not. Meanwhile, when Joe Biden has roughly equivalent allegations leveled against him, I think for the first month after the allegations, all the major media outlets spent a grand total of 14 minutes covering the story.
Or if they did, they're basically dismissing it, like, oh, she doesn't have any proof, or or Joe Biden came out, or a lot of times they try to put some humor on it, like, he said he doesn't remember, which I can believe that because he doesn't remember anything.
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, Brett Kavanaugh was the guy handpicked by Trump, whereas Joe Biden is the Democrat Party's nominee. And so there's their political affiliations. Oh, and up here in Canada, we had another comparable incident. It was more to do with racism, not sexual assault.
Yeah.
So in the last election campaign, it becomes known that Justin Trudeau wore blackface about 3 or so times when he was working, I think it was working as a high school teacher, back when he was a drama teacher. Yeah, like, I mean,
Well,
our
they were
prime minister,
doing
before he
West
became a
Side
politician,
Story,
his jobs consisted of snowboarding. He was a snowboard instructor and a drama teacher.
Yeah.
And anyways, yeah, and so it's like wearing blackface is generally viewed as being a rather racist thing and something that's mocking black people. And yet, he comes out and gives an apology, and all people are like, well, okay, he apologized. Now let's move on.
Well,
Yeah.
we
Meanwhile,
have a bunch of this going on in the UK now.
But
We
that-
have like comedians apologizing for jokes
Yeah.
they made 20 years ago, where
yeah, but
you
then
know
if you let
they
me
were
compare
they
this,
were impersonating a black person. But I mean, if you can't, you're an actor, and you're acting, right? You're not like, you don't say like, Brad Pitt murdered someone in a film. You don't say Brad Pitt, like that film should be, and he should apologize for what he did in the film.
Go to jail for murder.
Right.
Which is kind of how people act. Like if somebody said a tweet that might be racist or homophobic, like a few years ago, they sent out a tweet or said a joke that could be viewed as racist or homophobic, or somebody brings sexual allegations, then it's like, okay, crucify them, unless they're on our team, like Joe Biden. It's such hypocrisy. And
I mean, it's hypocrisy, but
I want to get into, probably not today, but in I don't know, maybe in one of our talks in the next few weeks, is the new media, because I think at this point, I don't know if you want to call it mainstream media or the televised media or traditional media, has lost just about all credibility. And so now there's
and everything else is called alt right.
Yeah, but now there's alternatives rising up in its place, and sometimes they do a good job, these new alternatives, whether it's YouTube channels or whatever, and sometimes they don't. So I think that's causing a lot of the mass confusion and mass hysteria. Like I mentioned the other night, like a lot of the problems in the world on the individual level and society level come from just people not knowing what's going on. Like what would solve everybody's problem, so to speak, is if they know here's exactly how to get what you want, or here's what you want and how to get it. You just go and do it, and then you'll get what you want. Then everybody would.
I mean, we can say that the modern media plays the role of the church in the 17th century or whatever.
Yeah.
That they would set the tone of the culture, right?
They can level such a strong guilt trip that they can dethrone a king, essentially.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what they've been trying to do for 3 years with Trump here in America, at least.
Yeah.
And it's just funny. This is what I was complaining about the other night too, is that we have a democratic system for a reason, and it's just really frustrating. Like I would have loved to see a serious Democratic candidate this year, have some serious debates and serious, all that. But Joe Biden,
the media's doing all the work. That's the thing. The media's doing all the work. The media is playing the devouring mother role.
Yeah.
On behalf of the politicians. If the politicians came out with anything, then they would be undermining the media, so to speak.
Yeah.
Except they're not playing the devouring mother when Trudeau wears blackface.
Well, no,
because Trudeau's their own child, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is what I was trying to get at when I was talking about how political affiliation seems to affect how racist a particular actor is.
Right, but you protect your own children, right?
And so the other half of the Trudeau example I was trying to get to is that just in the last week, a prominent conservative politician, Stockwell Day, well, he's now retired from politics, but he used to be a leader of a party back when he was in the game, and he was being interviewed on TV about, I'm not sure what the interview was about in general, but he made a comment about how systemic racism is not as bad here in Canada, which I think it's true. Maybe there still is systemic racism, but I think we're generally better off.
It can't be as bad because you don't have the South and everything else that was dealt with in our history of segregation and all that.
But he was forced off the board of 3 different companies he was involved in for that statement.
For that statement, just for systemic racism, it's not as bad. Okay, wow. Poor Canada.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the statement released by Macmillan LLP, which is one of the companies on the board.
Yeah.
It says, at Macmillan LLP, we believe that systemic racism is real, and that it can only be addressed when each of us, as individuals and organizations, commits to meaningful change. Meanwhile, if you look at his actual comment, I'm not sure I found a direct quote of it yet, but he's not saying it doesn't exist. He's just saying it's not as bad here. When did he ever said anything that goes against this idea that we have some systemic racism and all our individuals?
It's like a religious thing. It's like a holy religious thing because it has nothing to do with being coherent or making sense or rationality. It's just like it's very religious because you just have to say all is horrible that white people have ever done to minorities, and racism is like the worst problem ever in history.
Okay.
You don't have to make any sense of it. You just have to almost like you're devoting to a religious idea. But go ahead.
Let me check.
I just found. Sorry, I found Stockwell Day's exact quote. If you want me to give that.
Go on.
He rejects the Prime Minister's insinuation that all Canadians are somehow racist because our system is systemically racist. The Canadian system is built and everyday functions to defend the rights of minorities, and it should. Yeah. And we celebrate that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah. What I wanted to say about this, the collective idea, is I just remembered I read Freud.
The Pleasure Principle.
Not the Pleasure Principle. No, another thing by Freud, and I can't remember what it was. Anyway, he talks about the church. He talks about the group psychology, and he talks about how there are different types of groups. There's a group that has no. It's just a group with no leadership, leaderless groups. Yeah. And then you have groups. And then you have groups with leaders, and basically he thought about what ties together a group, and basically it's a principle of brotherhood.
Yeah.
Of love, right? Or he called it love. So that the group will be united in a love of either the leader or of each other in some way. Yeah. And if I think he talked about if a situation of panic arose, then the love relationship within the group would break down, and everyone would just head off in different directions, and chaos would ensue.
Sounds a lot of like what's going on right now.
Right. Again, and Freud is a bit, discredited. But I downloaded some audiobooks of Freud, and then, some of it's hit and miss. But yeah, he talked about the church and the church and the army.
Yeah.
And he essentially said it's very similar how the collective psychology or the selective psychology of the group works in a similar way around the principle of love, right? And right now, and not in a religious sense or whatever, but just a feeling of affinity and collective identity. And I guess that's if you look at the US flag, or whatever, people, or the Roman Empire, all those people weren't all Romans, but they identified with it because it was successful and good, and there was some kind of shared mimetic desire, or whatever you call it, if you're talking Girardian sense, that people share the same goals or desires, and that gives them a collective direction, and they pull in the same direction. And yeah, I mean, that seems to have completely broken down.
Yeah.
In the US.
Yeah.
And the question is, I guess, why and how do you get it back? And people will say, where are the strong leaders?
Yeah.
So where's someone like Martin Luther King,
right,
or like Muhammad Ali, even like where are the people that can unite the races and the people behind some kind of higher principle? And then then we get back to the matrix, and how do you leave the matrix? Because like how do you engender that kind of love within a group, a large group, and a group of like 350 million people? And like the only way that it's been done kind of in recent times basically is through sport and war.
Yeah.
And
which I think is a lot of the issue right now too, is people don't have anything to do. They can't even watch live sports anymore. You know, that used to kind of keep people busy, and that's one reason why I think you know, during, I mentioned I think last week that during the Obama administration there were like at least 4 or 5 of these riot situations between, I think, George Zimmerman and what happened in
Ferguson, though.
Yeah, Ferguson and Milwaukee and South Carolina, and some others that were a little bit different. And so there would be riots sometimes, but they would maybe last a weekend or maybe 2 weekends. But then it's like people got to get back to their lives, and football's on Sunday or whatever. You know? They've got shit to do, and they've got entertainment to get to. But now people got nothing to do, and they're hungry to be around human beings, physical human beings. So they're just like, okay, so we can do that. We're allowed to do that. Okay, let's go do it. What do we do? Okay, let's just go do that.
Yeah, and there's no army and church. You know, there's no like the two things that Freud talked about, and he basically talked about them as analogous, right? They're the same thing.
Well, and I feel like these woke principles, and you see it to a large degree in Canada, like what Ted was mentioning, and everything. They're ultra moralized principles, almost like modern religious ideas, and so they put them forth that way, but they just don't work the same way like a good religious idea works. Or
yeah, something. Right. Because and then we can talk about like the symbolism that we talked about with Christ, and the cross is the hierarchy, God and man, and then the left and right of, you know, justice and nurturing or whatever. I don't know. Or certainly is some kind of idea of equality across the of manhood, you know, shared brotherhood or whatever.
And two things that I think Chris. Sorry, all right, go on.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought anyway by that stage. So go ahead.
Two things that I think Christianity is very good on a theoretical level, regardless of whether or not people have done a good job putting this into practice, is you know, one of them is there's a very strong respect for the out group, the non-Christian, in a manner of speaking. You know, you don't have any of this idea of like, oh, if someone leaves the faith, they should be decapitated or anything crazy like that. And, you know, it's actually a very
cuckold religion. That was
cuckold. I despise that word.
Right, but what I was going to say was
even that, when you look in the Old Testament, like you look at the Levitical laws and whatnot, there's a lot of stuff that says, you know, the traveler in your land you should treat with respect. And
the stranger.
Well, according to Jordan Peterson, that particular concept is common to just about all Indo-European cultures of giving a lot of respect to the foreign travelers who's traveling through your land. So that's one thing that Christianity does really well, that sort of the modern
they embrace the other with compassion.
The love your enemy idea, right? And that's one thing that the left or the postmodern types aren't doing so well, is
right. In fact, they're doing the opposite, which That's a really important point. It's a point I was making last night in a little post just on that concept, that if anybody is hated, the hate cycle continues eternally until either hated party answers with compassion and pity on the on
Right.
Well, it's a race. It's always a race to the bottom. You know, it's a slippery slope. If you end up, you're saying like,
it's a bottom.
You can't say
when there's.
You can't say love like some of your neighbors, but not all of them. It's like there's no consistent rules that you can adopt. And
as soon as you start saying love some of your neighbors, you got to ask the question, what is some? Who is some?
Exactly. So this is why we talk about symbolism, and this is why Jonathan Pageau, I think, is a very good person in that sense, because the symbolism is what unites heaven and earth. Let's say that's the classic idea of it, and it's consistent across all levels of reality, right? And that's why it will work on whichever way, wherever it appears and wherever you see it works. And these ideas like racism, or pretty much anything that's put out nowadays, Black Lives Matter, doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Or even I want to be in control of my own body.
Not you're arguing, makes sense, but it perpetuates a hate cycle.
Yeah, and it just doesn't ring true, right? It doesn't sound right. It just sounds jarring if you listen to, because Black Lives Matter does not. It's a victim slogan.
Right.
It's a slogan of the slave in the sense of we're at your mercy and you need to give us mercy, right? And that was not black culture. If you listen to black culture in the 70s, black music, it was soul, it was blues, it was we're breaking, we're coming up. Influence. Diana Ross, Motown, and all this.
Right. There wasn't the idea of we have nothing to lose but our chains.
Right. And now it's just like, I'm a victim or I'm a gangster, and that's not like symbolically that's destructive, right? It's not.
You could be an oppressor in some hierarchies while simultaneously being oppressed on other hierarchies.
Yeah, I mean it works across all it works across all levels, right? But
and by the way, this is why sometimes I say it's really important to look at the Martin Luther King Jr. story, because he's like probably the best modern example of a hero, and especially in a Christ-like way. And the reason was because it's like, okay, Christ, at least in the story, was not a martyr, like he intentionally tried to get killed necessarily. It's that he knew he would probably be killed for the gospel that he was spreading, or however you want to say it. But similar with Martin Luther King Jr., but the interesting way that parallel goes to another level is that the gospel story kind of got perverted in a lot of different directions. Now, of course, you can still find what it was supposed to be in scripture and in symbolism and everything else in the gospel story. But similarly with Martin Luther King Jr., we made that tremendous progress because of the nonviolent movement that he put forth, in the 60s. And we would probably still be in like really horrible, overt prejudice, racist, segregated type of a world that would still be destroying us in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but why are you not seeing, why are you not seeing now? Why are we not seeing people with Martin Luther King banners? It's almost like I feel like
it's like BLM completely forgot about MLK.
No, it's that it's and okay, this is a little bit risky.
We'll get cancelled.
Well, yeah, no, we'll get canceled from my own Facebook Live. No, but, I don't know if anyone has overtly said this, but they don't. A lot of times, people don't like Martin Luther King Jr. because he's very nonviolent. So that message condemns a lot of what they want to do, which started at the same time, which was, you know, he was very against the terms Black Power, because he was very much. This is very important. This is why I think he's a modern hero for everyone, not just like one group or another or whatever. It's because he's very, very much on like, he wants everybody to like play together and live together and harmonize together, not just like the blacks are powerful. And so that side was fractured right away. And I don't know if the issue is partly because, you know, his platform was mainly through the church, which was very powerful at that time, and now the church isn't very powerful, at least on, you know, the political.
Yeah, but in real life, this is what always happens to the hero, right?
Well, right.
Hero...
That's the thing. Like with the Christ story, everybody wants to be like, oh look, Christianity is like this. Do our form of Christianity. No, it's like this. Do our form of Christianity. Same thing happened with, you know, the civil rights movement. It got counterfeited and co-opted after that, where it turned into this whole
and the hippie movement. But don't forget that, don't forget that, people forget that, you know, Christ, and you can't be just good, and this is the Christ argument against Christ, is that you cannot just be good. But Christ was not just good; he was defiant. He put up with, he went up against the system.
Right, and that's the thing with Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and a lot of these others, is they were able to bring about real change because they did it in the way that it needs to be done, which was a nonviolent, peaceful protest. And,
that was controversial, right? Because all the people who wanted violence,
right,
were like, he got in their way, and all the people who people were angry with. He told them not to be angry with, right. So they were frustrated with
very anti-herd. It's you know, very anti-groupthink,
and the fact,
like really wake up beyond red pill or woke.
And the fact that he could just take the herd with him with this anti-herd approach,
right.
It's like completely unheard of. Yeah. And at the end of it, you know, these people are taken out one way or another, they die. But the Christ story is different because the herd turned against Christ. He got cancelled, let's say.
Yeah.
By the mob. Like, you can literally say that. Or, you know, Pilate said Pilate wanted to let him go, right? But the mob said, kill him.
Crucify him.
And he was the system, right? He was the father, right? The great father, let's say, Pilate. But then the mob was like, no.
You want to talk about symbolism for a moment. Instead of releasing Christ, Barabbas was released.
Right.
And that is Greek. Abbas means father. I'm blanking what bar means. I'd have to look that up in a moment, but it is something.
Have you read any René Girard? I see Satan struck by lightning. I was just reading that. He talks about this, but I can't. He did say what Barabbas meant. I can't remember. Yeah. So this defiance, this non-violent defiance. I mean, it's very hard to pull off, right? If I guess in a cancel culture, in today's culture, it's basically the comedians who can pull it off, right?
Yeah.
They're the only ones who can walk the fine line between the truth and the absurd.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, okay. So the topic that I don't know will somewhat diverge to as we start to wrap it up is, I don't know what the answer is to all this, because what we're getting into on Sunday night is that we really need, perhaps it's a big long-term project. Maybe it'll take our whole lives in America, but to either abolish the party system or have multiple serious parties, or maybe some kind of election reform where more than two parties can compete.
Well, yeah.
And so again, like I said at the beginning, I'm interested to hear what you guys think as non-Americans as to how something like that can work and maybe come about and be either non-party or more than just two parties.
I got a lot of good thoughts on this, but I just want to jump back for a moment to the Barabbas thing. I just double checked this, and it is surprising how much symbolism there is in this name.
Right.
So the crowd, they had one option of getting Jesus released, who was the son of the Father, even though he wouldn't directly admit he was the Father. But the other man was named Barabbas, which literally means son of the Father.
Wow. Okay.
And so they asked for the man who's named son of the Father but is not, to be released instead of Christ. And so it's like this weird inversion.
And he was some type of a criminal too, right?
Yeah, some sort of common thief, perhaps a notorious thief, something like that.
I only mentioned that because it almost reminds me of how when we lose that nonviolent, peaceful way to come against evil or the wrong, and usually what comes out is another version of violence, sort of like what's happening right now. Is we don't just get like, okay, we're going to have protests that are going to say, we hate all these things, but it'll manifest in violence and a lot of times even death. Like a lot more people, died from the protest than what they're protesting. It's of course horrible that George Floyd died the way that he did, but they've demanded.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that the key is symbolism, right? The symbolic. So the symbolic act, we're still talking about it, right? Or the symbolic acts of Martin Luther King, we're still talking about. The symbolic act of forgiving the other guy,
right?
Taking the hit itself, is so powerful that it goes down in history, right?
Right.
It kind of makes the person immortal. Whereas like attacking someone, getting your 15 minutes of fame,
right,
or causing a ruckus, being in the debate for however long or whatever.
Yeah.
The people who got cancelled, the people who get cancelled,
right,
they come back, but they have to get cancelled. They have to go through that.
Right.
They have to stand up for what they, stand up for free speech or saying what they're saying.
Right.
I mean, this is why, Jordan Peterson, he can't be cancelled.
Yeah.
Because he symbolically stands up to it.
Right.
It's a matter of he doesn't lose his cool, but he stands up for himself.
Right.
And it's very like the way that Jordan Peterson is a very masculine kind of stand up for yourself.
And he has a sword for a tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very sharp.
He cuts through his words in such a way that he can criticize. Make a very exact criticism where in no way he's saying something that could be misinterpreted as going too far.
Yeah, people take it personally, but it's never anything personal. He's getting to the truth and the principle of the matter.
Right.
And that's what absolutely missing from politics. I mean, you couldn't name a single politician anywhere in the world like Jordan Peterson.
I mean, I think that's
I
axiomatic of
couldn't.
politics, and this is one reason why Peterson has decided not to go into politics directly. Right. That someone like him can, he can function as an actual politician, which is fine because he's still behind the scenes in Canadian politics. I don't think this
and American
people outside of Canada would know about this, but he is, he's very often involved with, speaking with leadership candidates with the Conservative Party and showing up at political events. Maybe not the most active person in the world, especially considering he's had some troubles last year.
Yeah, but he came to He came to Budapest and met Orban.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was. I would be curious to know what they talked about.
Was that recent?
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, but anyways, getting back to political parties.
Last year, yeah.
Right. So you're never going to get rid of the idea of a party system, because the alternative would be having your, is it 438 Congress people or whatever, having each one of them being sort of individuals in the public consciousness, and that means the voters would need to keep track of. They'd actually have to dive into the details of.
You need to have proper debate. You need to have proper debate. In the UK, the politicians are better known than in the US, I would say. Follow US politicians.
And so there's a couple of prerequisites, I'd say, if you want to even begin to dream of a world without parties, and one of them is you need a stronger presence of local news. So one thing that I think is true in both Canada and the US is that our news cycle is disproportionately dominated by federal issues, even though we are just as much as affected by local, municipal, and provincial issues, or state level issues. And so you need a stronger, like, the mass media would need to splinter off into local groups, and so you could actually have the individual media outlets that could cover the local candidates in a way that would allow the constituents, the voters, to dive into the individual details. But then you'd also need the voters themselves to bother taking the time. Whereas when you have a party system, flying a party banner over a candidate's head helps to simplify the decision-making process in a way that's fairly practical.
Well, it's just branding. It's a branding exercise.
Yeah.
Because people don't...
It's very easy to brand people as conservative or liberal, because most people, from their personalities, lean one way or the other.
Yeah, and I don't think it's inherently bad to have branding in politics. The difficulty is, the branding can become a tyrant, in a manner of speaking.
Right.
And so that, of course, is it's worse in the U.S. because your party system has an extremely high barrier to entry, and I can get into the mathematics of what I actually mean when I say that. I've researched a lot of different voting systems, and for a new party to form and get going in the U.S. is significantly harder than possibly every other country except maybe India.
Okay. Right. In Hungary, we have a system where anyone can. It's very easy to set up a party. So in Hungary we have a party called the Hungarian Two-Tailed Dog Party.
Okay.
And it's a joke party. It's a joke party. The tail wags the dog, but this dog has two tails. I guess that's a joke.
What's the? Do they actually get people elected though?
No, never.
Okay. But they here in Canada, we have a similar party called the Rhinoceros Party, and the idea is that politicians are like rhinoceroses. They're thick-skinned, dim-witted, usually very slow, but they can run hella fast when they need to.
But they do like flyer campaigns. They when the government put up these anti-immigrant banners, they put up they got loads of donations and put up joke ones, absurd ones in opposition.
I love these guys.
Orban was building, stadiums or whatever, and they said like, we need a stadium on the moon or something, whatever. I don't know. But their like main slogan is free beer, eternal life, and no tax or something like this.
Well, yeah.
So I mean, but it's good that we have something to vote for. No, I mean to undermine the system a little bit and make it like make a parody of it. And they did a thing where, because every Hungarian party has to go on the state TV channel, and they get a 5-minute slot, and you can look it up on YouTube. The guy, I'll send it later. The guy's wearing one of those big chicken masks, and he gives this whole interview. Obviously, the questions are scripted, and he just gives the whole interview, and he just says "kot kot kot kodash" the whole way through, which is what a Hungarian chicken would say. The whole time is like 5-minute interview, and he doesn't say a word of Hungarian. He just clucks like a chicken. At one point, he puts his glasses on, and he gets a written statement out. You see over his shoulder, and it just says "cluck cluck 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 cluck" on the statement, and he reads it out. He has serious questions like, why would you make the roads out of chocolate or something like this? And he just answers it with clucking sounds. So, off topic. Sorry, Isaac.
In America,
that's not exactly what I was talking about when I was saying the U.S. voting options.
We have Vermin Supreme. Have you guys seen Vermin Supreme?
No.
Okay, you should look him up on YouTube. But basically, he so in the primary elections, like anybody can run. At least they'll get like 2 states where they can be on the ballot. The first few primaries. But we have Vermin Supreme, who at least always runs in New Hampshire. And he's just like this old guy that lives in New Hampshire because it's, the first primary election state. But he his big thing is he wears a boot on his head, and his main platform is mandatory toothbrushing, and everybody gets a free pony.
A free what?
Free pony.
Yeah, free pony.
Oh.
So
all the little girls vote for him.
Yeah. But
I prefer the free beer, to be honest.
Yeah, it's making a similar political statement. But okay, so on to this subject though, I wonder if maybe parties can't exactly go away. In other words, like if we abolish the DNC and the RNC, the Republican and Democrat official parties.
How would you do that? But
I mean,
people would informally organize as parties.
Right, they would, but I wonder if we sort of accept that they're sort of informally organized, but if we could say that they can't be official, that would solve some of the problems. Because one reason we kind of got on this issue when we were talking about it the other night was because it's like I feel like the Democratic Party is especially bad at this, that they are very disingenuous, that they don't really have primary elections. They just kind of like make a deal of, okay, this is our establishment guy or girl this year, so deal with it.
Yeah, it's a backroom decision before the fact, and last cycle it was Hillary, and this cycle it was Joe Biden.
Yeah, and before that they decided it was Obama, and so on. Although
Obama did have a groundswell, but on the Republican side,
deal.
On the Republican side, you got Trump came in and out of the blue, right? So that's
right. Well, and that's some of the value that he brings. I mean, and I got in trouble. One of my members / Facebook friends, he posted something, and he's actually in the UK, I think, but he posted like stand with Trump 100%, and I just put like a laughing face reaction on it. He's like, remove your laughing face reaction. I'm like, freedom of speech. But the thing is that I believe everybody it would be wise to say, okay, our politicians, there's some things that we would want to stand behind them on and say good job, and other things that probably all of them you could say, okay, you screwed up on that. And that, and so his post was standing behind Trump 100%.
Right.
So
no room for debate.
Yeah. But anyway, so I think that this, if we could abolish the party system at least, and then they could still be there unofficially, because then you could have somebody because basically then what would have to happen is somebody would say, okay, I'm running as the Democrat, or what would actually be great, I think, is if ultimately in November you could have people come together and you could be there could be multiple Democrats running, and there could be multiple, and that's kind of the weird thing about it is, okay, it would be better if there were like 2 or 3 or 4 Democrats on the ballot for
specifically the president you're talking here. Yeah.
Do you know how it works in the UK? The UK system?
It's a parliamentary system? Yeah,
well, there's constituencies.
Okay.
I don't know how many there are, like 350, 400.
Right, equivalent to the American congressional districts.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's constituencies, and they gerrymander them quite a lot,
right.
Like, to make sure that the right party wins.
Right.
And basically, in your constituency, and maybe I don't know how many there are actually, but there's like maybe 50,000 people in the constituency, something like that, and they vote for their local MP. So you have local representation in Parliament. But the problem is that the party branding has become too powerful. So you're not going to vote for the best candidate, you'll vote for the one you want to win.
Yeah. Right. And then the party banners become a tyranny.
Right. And so and in your constituency, maybe the Labour's dominant. I mean, it's quite interesting. You have Labour's dominant, and then second you have the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives or whatever. So always the Liberal Democrats get like 15% of the vote, and they get 2% of the seats.
Okay.
So
that's because they're, they have 15% of the vote on average of the whole nation, but because there's not a lot of places where the vote's concentrated enough for them to win the seat, they only end up with 2% of the seats.
Right, because everyone's focused on the party.
Yeah.
And even though like if there's an issue, you write to your local MP, and then your local MP will represent your views in Parliament. But you vote for the person, but they're representing a party. So it should work much better than it does, but people don't think on a local level, they think in a national level.
Yeah, and it's the same here in Canada.
So for example, a country that works well, according to Nicholas Nassim Taleb, you ever read him? Anti-Fragile. It's not really in our realm of psychology, I guess. Oh, yeah, I guess it is. Anyway, he says that Switzerland is a good country.
Yeah.
Because no one knows who the Prime Minister of Switzerland is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
right.
Good.
No one.
They have directorship of 7 presidents, is what I've heard.
Yeah. I mean, no one knows what's going on in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Honestly, but they'll have a vote every 2 weeks on which whether to put a fountain in the square or whatever. Right. They'll have very localized democracy.
Yeah, that should be, I think.
And that makes total sense to me, right? Because and on very specific issues. So maybe the answer to your question would be to have, we're in the internet age, to have a much stronger localized democracies. So the city level, and then you have the more regional county level, and then you have the state level, and the democracy works on they put a lot of effort into forums and meeting people and town halls and having a good discussion, and on the basis of that, like, cut out all the bureaucracy. All the top down, these are the rules, and abide by them. And say, like, instead of planning permission, you say, let's ask, like, everyone in the street what they think.
Yeah, so I gotta
you can build your loft or your garden shed or whatever it is, and then everyone says fine, and off you go.
I got a couple thoughts that kind of bring what the two of you are saying together. So getting back to what you were saying about the what Isaac was saying about the American political issues. If you had a lower barrier to entry for new political parties, then when the old parties become corrupt, you can have new ones rise up and take their place, and you can also have more individuation within each party. And so, right now, because you only have two parties, each need to be very, very big tent parties, right? So the Democrats are like the parties of everyone who's sort of mildly liberal to the communist, and the Republicans are the party for everyone who's mildly conservative to libertarian, and neoconservative war hawks, and just like this strange amalgamation. But if you have a lower barrier to entry, then you can the different sub factions of the party can split into their own constituent parts. And this also means that if you have a particular region or an area that has very localized concerns that the rest of the country doesn't necessarily deal with, then it would be a lot easier for that region to sort of create a party that that could only ever win in about 3 different seats, because their areas are so localized. But if the barrier to entry is so low, then it could be a viable option just to have like a Cape Cod party or like a Florida Panhandle party or something like that. And that
the Scots have a Scottish National Party, and then they win quite a lot of seats.
Well, even that, like, it's a bit more of a local party in the sense that it's not the whole UK, it's just Scotland, but it's still not a hyper local party in the sense that I'm thinking of here. What you can get, if you, part
like
of
a free Seattle party,
free Seattle party,
a jazz party,
and so really you had proportional.
So one idea that it's sort of libertarian, but not exactly. Although I think libertarian is largely misunderstood. Well, partly because it's sort of an oxymoron that there is a libertarian party, because libertarians should be anti-party and anti-government, but then they have a party, and then they have politicians who go into the parties and everything else.
No, you're going to get them confused with anarchists. Libertarians still even having some government.
Well, right.
Yeah, and that's a slippery slope, and that's where you end up with too much government.
Right, it's tricky. Although I think the answer might be something along the lines of finding, because the government, if we just quit focusing on the government, because basically it can't do a whole lot of anything, and rather than focusing on the government just being this receptacle for projections, which is really all its main purpose has become, we focus on things that would have to be mainly private sector that can solve issues. So, like, I think it's an interesting example. A lot of the way, like, Elon Musk is one of our sort of modern heroes of this generation, and that he saw a lot of these issues to our planet, including global warming. So he started his solar company and his electric car company. And then he's saying, we need to be interplanetary in his lifetime. So he's trying to get people at least on Mars in his lifetime as well.
At least on Mars.
Because ultimately a lot of people in his camp or whatever believe that we are going to either need to get to Alpha Centauri or another solar system, and or figure out another way to sustain life, whether that's have
I'm just going to go on the record and say I think that's insane. But anyways, go on.
It kind of is, but it might be something. But it's a conversation worth having, and it's a conversation that's.
This is like the hero delusion gone too far.
Yeah. Well,
we don't need to go to another planet. All the other, loads of films have been made. A lot of films have been made. And there's the hero, going, beyond the final frontier or whatever, the final frontier, and we have to explore that. And that's great. But then a lot of the time, it's like the symbolism of these films is, why are you leaving your wife and family in this beautiful green earth behind,
Yeah.
Why are we running away from earth and nature?
Right. I mean that's the Little Mermaid story right there. Right. You got the Little Mermaid has a reasonably good home, a bit of a tyrannical father, but then she just leaves everything for completely superficial love and and leaves it in a way that she can't return, and that's why I think it's a fair comparison to traveling to Mars, because she ceased to be a mermaid, so it's not like she's just visiting, marrying off to a far country. Like, she's actually making herself so she can no longer visit her home again.
This is why symbolism works. You can compare traveling to another galaxy to the Little Mermaid.
Yeah, okay. When you watch enough Jonathan Pageau, you learn how to do these things. You just pull a Little Mermaid reference out of nowhere. It's like, that's Elon Musk.
I get it. Yeah. And what's his name? Peterson does that too. But the reason I mentioned that, it's not necessarily that I agree completely with Elon Musk or that I disagree, but what's really powerful to see that he did, and he's actually still doing it in other moral ways. These are they called Starlink satellites? Yes, I think Starlink satellites. The whole mission there is something that he sees as a huge moral imperative, where first he has to kind of sell out because he's going to make a lot of money off of getting information over the ocean, the internet connection that goes over between at least Europe and North America will be like a half a second quicker or some fraction of a second quicker, which will help for
live streaming.
Well, that, and also help the stock markets between especially London and
of course, because the stock markets are the barometer of reality, right? The everything happens.
I still don't fully get it, but the fact of the matter is, the most direct connections, like the New York Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange, have a direct line across the Atlantic. Like, there's no intermediaries that they have to go through, because somehow being exactly on time in stock trading is just that important.
Well, but basically, if stocks can trade back and forth a fraction of a second quicker, they can make more money, and that happens supposedly in these Starlink satellites that will eventually be around the entire globe. Because
there were some scandals where because of the microsecond difference, they were able to hack the system and make money. Someone found a faster connection, and that broke it.
Right. Well, so
anyway.
but the big sort of moral aspect of it is that there's, I don't know how many, it's something like 1 billion or 2 billion people in the world have no chance of getting this wonderful thing that we love as the internet. And so his big picture is to make sure anywhere in the world you'll be able to get a strong internet connection, whether you're in
actually
Africa.
Yeah, actually, very, 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 very good point is that the internet is, like, I think, completely underestimated as a force for good.
Right.
Because the way, I mean, look at the three of us, like, great minds connected across nations. You know, instantaneously, there's a bit of a lag sometimes or whatever.
Yeah.
But basically, we can have a conversation and the whole world can see this conversation.
Yeah.
This is another thing I think Peterson gets right when he says, like, he doesn't spend a lot of time wondering how things go wrong. He wonders how the hell things even work in the first place. Like, it's a marvel that everything around us works so well, and I think he's right on that one.
Yeah.
Although I really gotta rip on Elon Musk here. I don't know if you're just misrepresenting what he's saying, but you're not gonna get everyone in the world to have quality internet from satellite connections. That, like, if you look at the amount of time it takes light to travel from the surface of Earth to satellites and back, and you factor in the amount of bandwidth that even the best can handle and all this kind of stuff, it's
well, that's on current technology. His sort of project in that is to bring about new technology using not even anything like optics, but more along the lines of lasers that are constantly shooting from the ground to up to thousands of satellites, and then they shoot lasers between each other.
I mean, I still feel like it'd be easier to get people quality internet by just sort of the, like, landlines, if you will, or physically connecting people down on Earth.
Well,
you could probably do for cheaper.
So the way they would connect is they have to get then a box that's they say it's the size of a pizza box, and then that, I don't know if that's going to just connect a household or how many potential households can connect to that pizza box thing that is going to maybe cost them $100 or whatever.
Can I wrap up? Because I want to go to bed.
Oh, yeah.
And I have something to say on this, because you've gone totally miles away from you've gone to another planet here.
Well, okay. I want to hear what you'll say, but let me just say the point I was getting at Elon Musk is that he sees problems, and even if he's somewhat misguided or wrong, or you can debate what he's trying to do and how worthy it is of doing, he's found ways to make these things that he sees as moral endeavors, make them happen through the private sector. And so I feel like that example, to some degree, is going to be what's going to happen. And we're already seeing that, how, like, private companies are becoming the censors and the gatekeepers for freedom of speech, or the lack thereof, with Google and Facebook and everything else. And, there's a lot more private companies that are becoming stronger than anything the government could do. So to our point of this whole party system, matrix systems, and everything else, I feel like the future is going to be saying, well, screw you, government, you're too slow anyway. And similar to what Elon Musk has been doing, it's like, okay, we're going to find a way to get this done in the private sector. You could even say that to a degree, with what goes on with the police forces, where it's like, rather than just say defund them, it's like, come up with a really good alternative and then move the funding over to that, But anyway, we should wrap up in a minute anyway.
Be propositional, not oppositional. Yeah. That was a favorite saying of a beloved Canadian politician who'd passed away about 10 years ago.
Okay.
Anyways, yes.
Anyway, Adrian, it sounds like you had a couple points to make.
This comes back to what I said about captains of industry.
Yeah.
The great wise fathers who like really push things forward without really taking much like store in democracy or what other people think. You know, the way that Henry Ford said, if I asked the people what they wanted, I would, they would say they wanted faster horses. And he says, like, you know, I'll make a car. So, like, I guess that's the idea of the great father or the wise father, who, or the wise king, who goes ahead and does it, and says, like, it does, like, this whole idea of democracy and consensus or whatever, and really plays the kind of hero role. And I guess if that person now is Elon Musk, then that's problematic, because these things are not gonna yield a better society, right? They're just like dreams about going to Mars, or, you know,
well, some of them have it
nanoseconds faster internet or whatever. It's just like technology grandstanding, basically.
Of course,
you know,
one of the
kind
big
of space
problems.
race.
Of course, one of the big problems here is it's difficult to tell between the prophet and the madman. You know, it's
right.
If someone had, you know, if Henry Ford had said in 1890 that he's going to create machineries that used roughly the same principles as steam mills, except instead of using steam, they used gasoline, and they would replace horse and buggy one day. Like, a lot of people would have thought he was a madman, right? And, like, you know, and Elon Musk is saying that he's gonna get people to Mars and that it's gonna be a viable solution to our climate going to shit. And, like, I think he's a madman. And, you know, there's a chance he's actually a prophet. And you don't know. You don't know until it's too late. Because
I don't know, but I think the climate is worse on Mars.
Yeah, like, so to put it concisely, the worst case.
I don't think you will ever get that bad.
They're far enough away.
Yeah, exactly. The worst case predictions for Earth's climate will still have it be better than Mars. So I don't understand why we'd ever want to go to Mars. Like, its average temperature is on par with Antarctic, but they have less water and less oxygen in the air. Why?
It's more of the conversation. Like, even that we can have this conversation. And it's not that we're going to be better off on Mars. It's figuring out how to potentially live on another planet. And it's not even necessarily because of climate change exactly. It's that there are going to, so the sun will safely do its job, our sun in this solar system, for roughly somewhere between 1 billion and 5 billion more years.
Oh my God, really? Like,
yeah.
Where will Black Lives Matter be?
Yeah.
That stage,
well,
you know, like,
also, between
in the last month, we've had.
But then, when the sun goes out, all lives will be black.
Yeah.
Right, man. Come on.
There will be other potential extinction level of events too within the next, you know, if there's going to be
5 billion years. Yeah.
Well, whether there's going to be an ice age, or there's going to be one of these super volcanoes.
Or COVID. COVID's going to kill us all.
Yeah, definitely. So we may have to figure out different ways to live on a planet, whether it's our own or different ways to live on a planet.
Yeah, but you see how this is the ultimate ducking the question. I mean, we're talking about the immediate like Black Lives Matter or COVID or whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you bring in like what's going to happen in 5 billion years.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I mean, symbolically speaking, you know, that's, you can watch Star Trek and imagine all these things, but
yeah, you
know, for our lives and the lives of our children, you know, you know, the reality we live in is what we need to think about, and that's very much on the psychological level of how we deal with, like, obviously now we're in a kind of pub atmosphere. I've had 2.5 beers. Relax. We can talk about going to the moon and the Mars and whatever, and it's like kind of like a fun thing to talk about, right? But it's exactly avoiding the big questions. Is what will happen to our relationships, our livelihoods, our kids, our grandchildren? Will we be able to look after them? Will there be enough food or whatever? Or will there be a race war or whatever else? I don't think there will. But
again, I bring that up only because the answer seems to be just fine. The government is screwed up, but it's manageable how much it's screwed up, or even if it's a party system that's the problem or whatever. So the answer might be just let it be its thing, try to manage it to not get too much more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, times have been way worse, right?
Yeah, but the private sector.
There are still buildings here in Budapest with like gunshots. You can see the gunshots from the Second World War, or 1956, where the Stuka's got gunshots in it. People were being shot at here. Real shit was going down. And people, I guess, in the States lose the perspective on that, really, because even the civil rights thing in the 50s, I mean, it was nothing compared to communist Russia, let's say.
Right.
Or like even in Hungary.
Or like, police shootings, and someone, I got into a discussion with someone about police shootings, and he was pointing out, 1,000 people have been shot by police in the U.S. And I mean, for starters, of course, some of those are going to be in situations where it's reasonably legitimate. And I'm not going to venture into what proportion of those or try to define that. I'm just going to put that out there. And even still, like, even if all of those 1,000 were completely unjust,
right? So imagine,
like, it still wouldn't even be nearly as bad as all war.
I mean, we're on COVID level insignificance. But I'm saying that was a joke. I'm saying 100 million people died in Russia, or people were just dragged from their beds and never seen again.
Right.
That's like, or East Germany, everyone, or here.
Yep. That was my grandmother's.
Everyone was snitching on each other. Everyone was. If you weren't reporting on your neighbor, then you were a traitor. So it's like, you got to take this stuff with a pinch of salt, man, because otherwise, otherwise you get into, like, this is, I guess, the point of the discussion is the devouring mother, thing, right? Because where it's reached the point where no one can die anymore of COVID, right? No one, it's a tragedy if a 96-year-old died, and I think I told you this, Isaac. That my great grandmother hanged herself age 96. Because she didn't want to be a burden to her 70-year-old daughter, Like, well, the time comes for everyone, and those people are counted on the statistics as the COVID deaths. And
and that's the other hypocrisy people bring up lately is how you could a month ago it was illegal. Because people are dying every day, no matter what. Every year, America, there's roughly 8,000 deaths a day just from anything, and it was illegal to have any kind of gathering for like a funeral. Or if you did, there'd be a lot of regulations. Maybe you could have about 10 to 20 people at the most, and they'd have to wear all these masks and everything. And then, of course, yes, it's horrible that George Floyd died, but he had this huge people of like 10 or 20,000, people at his funeral. So sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. What point do you break the law?
Right.
At what point do you say enough is enough? Like,
and getting back, sir, the devouring mother idea. When you start to view absolutely every death as a complete tragedy that needs to be avoided at all cost, you end up like you sort of, well, the government's been clamping down on all of this safety stuff to avoid one category of deaths, but as a result, it's been creating all these other deaths in all sorts of other categories. For example, the opioid crisis that we've had going on here in North America for a while. It's flared up again. British Columbia just recorded a record number of deaths in May
from opioids,
opioid overdoses. And there's no doubt in my mind that's because of all the strains that have been placed on the social service addictions rely on, and the stresses it causes them to lose the job, etc.
So I think, more people should have this kind of discussion of, the reality and devouring mother versus tyrannical father, and it's like Huxley versus, well, you say Soma is the equivalent of the opioids, right? So that's happening, and how do we break this cycle of tyrannical father versus
devouring mother?
Working in concord, they're working together basically, and it's that's pretty depressing.
I hate to end it on that depressing note. It sounds like you gotta go, Adrian.
I gotta get going too.
Nice
chatting.
Yeah. So anything you guys want to add before we wrap it up here in a second?
I was just having one. Sorry, go on.
Where are the heroes? Where are the heroes?
Yeah,
where's the rationality around, nurturing? Where's the warmth and the love?
I would say that's a good point, but to a point you made just a minute ago.
Sorry, Ted.
No, but then we'll get to Ted and wrap it up. But what I think needs to happen a lot more too is just like you said, more and more conversations like this. Mm-hmm. So people just being unafraid, whether they use the internet to do it like this or get together locally, however they do it. People just need to have more and more civil conversations, because then things like rioting and protests won't need to take place. People can get together and get their heads clear and find solutions rather than madness and herd. But go ahead, Ted.
And the heroes will emerge out of the discourse. Yeah, my final thought is that after talking about these devouring mother and tyrannical father archetypes, it seems to me that a good concise summary of devouring mother is someone or something that imposes safety on you to the point that it or that tries so hard not to get you killed that it kills others.
Right.
Or tries so hard,
kills you in a different way.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, well, it's that whole caged bird idea, You can keep a bird really safe if it's caged, but it's not going to last.
Right.
But yeah, that's all I have to say. Great discussion. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
I wish we could end it on a more positive note, but I guess the positivity is that it was a good type of conversation that we need to have more of, and everybody needs to have more of. And it was good talking to you, Ted, and again, Adrian. And yeah, we'll do it again in the next couple weeks probably, and I'll let you guys go.
All right, thank you.
We're all heroes.
Yeah, we're heroes. We talked it out instead of rioted and killed people or anything.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in maybe next couple of weeks. All right. Bye.
Good.
Man.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.